Can you remember those school rules? The ones so strict it's hard to believe they were ever real. In the 1970s, school meant paddles, prayers, and punishments that shaped who we became without us even questioning them. Looking back now, were we disciplined or just controlled? Corporal punishment was not just allowed in the 1970s, it was expected. Teachers and principals kept wooden paddles hanging behind their desks, ready for anyone who talked back, forgot homework, or got caught chewing gum. One wrong move could mean a trip to the office where a wooden board, sometimes with holes drilled in it to make the sting worse, would be used in front of other students. Parents rarely objected, and most schools saw it as building character. Students learned early that fear kept order more than respect did. The sound of a paddle striking wood or desk was enough to quiet a whole hallway. Many adults who went to school then still remember that mix of embarrassment, fear, and anger, not the lesson that came after. Looking back now, it is hard to believe this was ever called discipline. It was control disguised as morality, and it left a generation who learned more about silence than self-expression. Public punishment in classrooms was another normal part of 1970s schooling, and nothing symbolized that better than the dunce chair. If you were caught daydreaming, laughing too loud, or falling behind, you could be made to sit at the front of the class facing the wall while everyone else stared. Sometimes teachers made kids wear a paper hat or hold a sign that said slow or lazy. Humiliation was a teaching tool, and students were told it would make them stronger. But the truth was, it made children terrified of making mistakes. Many adults still feel that pang of shame when they think about being singled out for something as small as a spelling error. The dunce chair was less about correction and more about control, a way to remind everyone watching what happens if you step out of line. Today, that kind of cruelty would never pass as education. In the 1970s, teenage pregnancy was not seen as a challenge to support. It was a problem to remove. Pregnant students were often forced out of school, told they would set a bad example. Some were sent to secret special schools, while others simply disappeared from classrooms one day. Administrators claimed it was to protect the school's reputation, not the student's future. Friends would whisper, teachers would avoid the subject, and an entire chapter of a young woman's life would be erased under the word shame. These girls were denied the right to graduate alongside their classmates or to continue their studies at all. The idea that motherhood and education could coexist was unthinkable to many at the time. It was a cold reflection of how society valued appearances more than compassion. Looking back, this rule did more than hide pregnancies. It hid humanity. Fashion was rebellion in the 1970s, and for girls, something as simple as wearing pants could get them sent home. Many schools enforced strict dress codes requiring dresses or skirts below the knee. Jeans, slacks, or anything resembling male clothing were banned in the name of modesty. A girl wearing pants was often called disrespectful, even immoral. Yet it was also an era when women were fighting for equal rights outside the classroom, and school dress codes became a quiet battleground for that same fight. Some girls refused to change, others were suspended, and a few made local headlines for challenging the rules. When these codes finally started to fall away, it was not because schools suddenly became modern. It was because students refused to back down. What was once labeled inappropriate became a symbol of progress. Hair became another target of control, especially for boys. If your hair touched your collar or ears, you risked suspension or public humiliation. Principals would walk the halls with rulers, checking length against the dress code. Long hair was seen as a threat, a sign of rebellion, nonconformity, or even moral weakness. Some schools kept scissors in the office to fix violations on the spot. For many students, hair became a quiet protest against authority, a way to express individuality when few other options existed. Parents argued with schools, but change came slowly. The hair wars of the 1970s were about more than style. They were about identity, freedom, and the right to be different in a system built to make everyone the same. Believe it or not, smoking was part of school culture. Many high schools had official smoking areas outdoors, complete with benches and ashtrays. Teachers would supervise or even join in during breaks. It was considered normal. a way to relax between classes. Cigarette companies marketed heavily to teens, and schools did little to discourage it. The smell of tobacco hung in hallways, on clothes, even in gym lockers. Parents accepted it as a phase, unaware of the health risks we now take for granted. By the late 1970s, as public health campaigns grew, these smoking courts began to disappear. But for years, they stood as a reminder that even in a place meant for learning, bad habits were sanctioned by the system itself. Teachers lighting up inside classrooms sounds unbelievable today, but in the 1970s it was as common as chalk dust. Many teachers had ashtrays right on their desks and a lit cigarette balanced between their fingers while they lectured. Smoke curled around overhead projectors, and the air was thick by the end of the day. Students sat quietly, breathing it all in, not daring to complain. Some teachers even used cigarettes as part of their persona, the cool teacher with rolled-up sleeves and a cloud of smoke overhead. It symbolized authority and adulthood, not addiction. Looking back, it is astonishing how normalized it was to fill a room of children with secondhand smoke. What we now call dangerous was once seen as sophistication. The classroom might have been filled with lessons, but the air itself was toxic. Patriotism was mandatory in the 1970s classroom. Every morning began with the Pledge of Allegiance, and refusing to stand was seen as an act of defiance. Students who stayed seated or silent could face detention, suspension, or even expulsion. It was less about love of country and more about enforcing obedience. Some kids quietly mouthed the words to avoid punishment, while others looked down at their desks, hearts pounding in defiance they could not voice. A few brave ones refused entirely, sparking whispers, outrage, or even calls to their parents. Those moments turned a daily routine into a test of loyalty no child should have had to face. Teachers were expected to report disrespectful students, and principals treated it like insubordination. Few questioned whether forcing loyalty was loyalty at all. Many children recited the words automatically, their voices blending into a rhythm they never truly thought about. Decades later, the idea of punishing someone for silent protest feels completely un-American, yet that was the daily reality. The 1970s may have looked free and expressive on the surface, but inside the classroom, conformity was law. Morning announcements in the 1970s sometimes sounded more like sermons than school updates. Many schools began the day with Christian prayers broadcast over the intercom. Teachers and students of other faiths, or none, were expected to bow their heads and participate. It was tradition, they said, a way to start the day right. A hush would fall over the classroom as the principal's voice echoed through the speaker, reading verses before the pledge. Some students faked reverence to avoid standing out, while others truly believed they were doing something good. For those who did not share the faith, the silence was heavy, a mix of isolation and quiet resentment. But for many, it was a quiet reminder that religion and public education were still deeply tangled. Children who hesitated were called out or told they lacked respect. It would take court cases and years of social change before those prayers were fully banned. The intercom that once echoed with blessings now hums with neutral silence. What some remember as unity, others remember as exclusion, and that contrast still lingers in how we define freedom today. Appearance was everything, especially for girls. Teachers and administrators conducted random hair and makeup checks, deciding what was acceptable based on personal taste. Too much eyeliner, lipstick, or nail polish could get a girl sent home. Some schools even banned mascara altogether. Teachers would stand by mirrors or locker areas, pointing out excess makeup like it was a disciplinary issue. A smudge of eyeliner could turn into a lecture on morality, while chipped nail polish was labeled sloppy. For many young girls, getting ready for school felt less like preparation for class and more like preparing for judgment. The rule was that beauty should be natural, but what that really meant was controlled. Boys could be messy and scruffy, girls had to look clean, proper, and calm. These inspections turned self-expression into a source of anxiety. Many women who went to school then still remember the sting of a teacher's comment about their looks. The classroom mirror reflected not learning, but judgment, and it taught young girls that appearance mattered more than voice. Gym class in the 1970s was not just about push-ups or running laps. It was about public humiliation disguised as fitness. Students lined up in front of their classmates to be weighed, their numbers recorded out loud by teachers holding clipboards. The scale sat in the corner of every gym like a silent judge, and no one could escape its verdict. Fitness progress was what they called it, but it was really a ritual of comparison. Kids whispered, laughed, or cringed as each name was called. No one questioned why it mattered how much a child weighed, only that lighter meant better. For many, this was their first lesson in body shame, long before social media ever existed. Teachers claimed it built discipline, but it mostly built anxiety, especially for those who already felt different. Students still remember the metallic click of that scale, the scratch of pen against paper, and the eyes that followed them back to the bench. In a place meant to build confidence, self-worth was measured in pounds. Looking back, it is easy to see how cruel those moments really were. As if being weighed in front of peers was not enough, schools often posted physical fitness results for everyone to see. Gym teachers would tack up large charts on the wall, listing every student's name and their performance in push-ups, running, or flexibility tests. The fastest and strongest stood proudly at the top. Students would crowd around those charts, their eyes scanning for their names as if their entire worth hung on a single line of ink. Some pretended not to care, while others secretly compared themselves to friends, rivals, or even siblings in the same school. It was competition disguised as health education, and it shaped how kids saw their bodies for years to come. Everyone else fell into the lower ranks, names in plain sight. Teachers claimed it was motivation, but it was really shame in chart form. Students dreaded those announcements because there was no hiding from the numbers. If you struggled, everyone knew. If you excelled, you were expected to stay there forever. These lists divided kids as clearly as report cards, but with more embarrassment attached. What should have been about progress turned into a public scoreboard of failure. Many people who grew up then still recall the sinking feeling of seeing their name halfway down, or worse, at the bottom. The message was clear. Success was public, but so was shame. That kind of motivation did not build athletes. It built memories of humiliation that lasted long after graduation. Few experiences from 1970s gym class were as invasive as the uniform check. Gym teachers demanded absolute conformity. Every student had to wear the exact school-issued shorts and shirts, no exceptions. Before class began, teachers would sometimes order students to line up and lift their shirts slightly or tug their shorts to show the waistband, proving they were wearing the correct outfit underneath. Some students froze in embarrassment, their faces burning as teachers walked the line. Others tried to laugh it off, but the unease lingered long after class ended. The smell of sweat, the sound of whistles, and the echo of orders made those inspections feel like tiny military drills. If anyone forgot or substituted their own clothes, it meant detention or a lower grade. In some schools, girls were told to change in front of one another, and privacy barely existed. It was not just about uniforms. It was about control and compliance. Teachers believed enforcing sameness built unity, but it only built resentment and discomfort. For some students, those checks were humiliating and frightening, especially when teachers crossed personal boundaries in the name of discipline. Years later, those same rules feel unthinkable. What was once called routine inspection would now be recognized for what it truly was, an invasion of personal space that stripped students of both comfort and dignity. One of the most common rules in 1970s classrooms was also one of the most unforgiving: no bathroom breaks without permission. Once class began, the door might as well have been locked. Teachers treated restroom requests as acts of rebellion, and many students learned to simply hold it in. Some would squirm quietly in their seats, eyes glued to the clock, praying for the bell. Others risked asking and endured public scolding that left them humiliated in front of everyone. The rule made something natural feel like a moral failure, and children learned to fear asking for help. Those who could not were met with scolding, shame, or even detention. It did not matter if you were sick, nervous, or desperate. Leaving without a signed slip meant disrespecting authority. Some teachers even believed denying bathroom breaks built discipline and focus. But for the children on the receiving end, it built fear and humiliation. Many remember sitting at their desks, counting the minutes, their stomachs in knots. A few could not wait, and those incidents haunted them for years. What was seen as order and control now reads as cruelty. Denying a child basic human needs was never about education. It was about power. Cafeterias in the 1970s had their own set of unspoken laws, and one of the worst was the clean plate rule. Children were told they could not leave the lunch table until every bite was gone. It did not matter if the food was cold, mushy, or nauseating. Wasting food was a sin, teachers said, especially when kids in other countries are starving. Supervisors patrolled the aisles, watching trays closely, and those who hesitated were scolded. Kids learned tricks, spreading food thinly to make it look eaten, hiding vegetables under napkins, or trading unwanted bites to friends who were hungrier or braver. The cafeteria became a quiet battlefield between appetite and authority, and everyone had their own small rebellion. Years later, many adults realized they still cleaned their plates out of habit, not hunger, a lesson they never asked to learn. Some kids tried hiding peas under napkins or sneaking food into milk cartons, but they usually got caught. The rule was meant to teach gratitude, but it often taught disgust. Many children developed unhealthy relationships with food, learning to eat even when full or to associate meals with pressure and guilt. For a generation, the school lunchroom was not just noisy and chaotic. It was a small theater of forced obedience. Today, the idea of punishing a child for refusing to eat would be unthinkable. But back then, finishing your plate was not just expected, it was mandatory. Discipline in the 1970s could take strange and terrifying forms, and one of the harshest was the principal's office lock-in. When students misbehaved or needed to cool down, some principals would place them in small storage rooms or supply closets, alone, in silence, sometimes in the dark. There were no cameras, no supervision, just fear. The student might stay there for minutes or hours depending on the mood of the principal. Teachers and parents rarely questioned it because they trusted authority. The sound of the door shutting was unforgettable, a heavy click that meant you were completely alone. The air smelled of cleaning supplies and dust, and the longer you sat there, the smaller the room felt. Every creak outside the door made your heart race, wondering if someone was coming back or if they had forgotten you entirely. To the staff, it was a practical way to maintain control. To the kids, it was punishment through isolation. Many remember sitting on the cold floor, hearing the muffled sound of typewriters and voices outside, wondering when someone would come back. For a child, that kind of solitude could feel endless. It is hard to imagine any educator defending that now, yet at the time it was accepted as normal discipline. What adults once called cooling off looks more like psychological cruelty in hindsight. Disrespecting a teacher in the 1970s was one of the gravest offenses, and disrespect could mean almost anything. Rolling your eyes, sighing, or even questioning an instruction was considered insubordination. Some students were immediately suspended or expelled on the spot. Principals supported their staff without question, and parents often sided with the school, assuming the teacher was right. It was an era when adults ruled without challenge. Children's voices held little weight, even when they were punished unfairly. Some kids learned to mask every reaction, forcing themselves to nod and smile even when they disagreed. Others stopped participating altogether, afraid that curiosity might be mistaken for defiance. The silence that filled classrooms was not respect, it was survival. The system valued obedience above fairness, and once labeled disrespectful, a student's record could follow them for years. For many, it was the end of trust in authority. The lesson was not about manners or self-control, it was about silence. The smallest act of independence could end a future, and that reality shaped how an entire generation learned to swallow their opinions. Today, that kind of blind punishment feels extreme, but back then, it was the rule of the classroom. School clubs and extracurricular activities in the 1970s reflected the strict gender expectations of the time. Boys could not join cheerleading, dance, or home economics, and girls were banned from football, mechanics, or debate clubs in some districts. Guidance counselors openly discouraged students from crossing those lines, warning it would bring the wrong kind of attention. For many schools, gender roles were treated as tradition, not discrimination. The boy who wanted to sew was mocked. The girl who wanted to weld was told no. Even as the women's rights movement grew nationwide, schools lagged behind, teaching conformity instead of equality. Some students challenged the system anyway, quietly showing up at the wrong club meetings just to prove they could. They were often laughed at or sent home, but their courage started to chip away at the old expectations. Those small acts of rebellion became the cracks that would eventually break open the walls of gendered education. The rules were often unwritten but deeply enforced by both teachers and peers. Only toward the late 1970s did some districts start allowing mixed activities, but by then, countless students had already been pushed into boxes they never fit in. These outdated club restrictions might seem small, but they taught something far larger: who society thought you were allowed to be. In some schools, gender segregation extended beyond clubs and into the classroom itself. Boys and girls were often separated for lessons that reinforced stereotypical skills: home economics for girls, shop class for boys. Teachers defended it as preparation for real life. Girls learned cooking, sewing, and childcare while boys worked with wood, metal, or engines. It was an unspoken law of education, shaping future roles long before students even had a say. Many girls secretly envied the power tools, while some boys wished for the creativity of cooking. But crossing that boundary was discouraged or mocked. One boy who tried to enroll in home economics was told flatly, "That class isn't for you." A girl who asked for shop was laughed at until she dropped the request. The system pretended to prepare kids for life, but what it really did was decide it for them. These divisions quietly told students that their future was already decided, that curiosity had limits based on gender. By the end of the decade, integration began slowly, but the damage lingered. The classroom had already taught its lesson: equality was optional. Educational film strips in the 1970s painted a world that mirrored the biases of the time, and few questioned it. These short instructional movies were shown in dark classrooms, the whir of the projector filling the room. They covered everything from hygiene to civics, but often with a narrow, stereotyped view of race, gender, and culture. Women were shown cooking, cleaning, and smiling in the background. Men were leaders, thinkers, and decision-makers. Non-white characters were rarely present, and when they were cast as sidekicks or cautionary examples. Students sat quietly, watching these stories over and over, believing them to be truth. There was no discussion, no challenge, only quiet acceptance. Those flickering frames of the perfect life became part of how a generation learned what was normal and what was not. Teachers used these films as unquestioned truth, reinforcing ideas that would later be called discriminatory. Students absorbed it all because no one told them otherwise. The perfect American family on screen looked the same every time: white, suburban, and obedient. For many children, that was the only version of success they were ever shown. Decades later, those same reels feel like relics of a darker lesson: that education was not always about learning. It was about shaping what society wanted you to believe. In the 1970s, a troubling gray area existed in schools: teachers dating former students. It was not technically against the rules once the student graduated, but that loophole carried a disturbing undertone. In small towns where everyone knew everyone, a relationship between a teacher and a recent graduate was sometimes seen as romantic rather than exploitative. Teachers held enormous power and influence, and that dynamic did not suddenly vanish with a diploma. Many of these relationships began with years of familiarity, mentorships that quietly blurred into something more. Some teachers waited until a student's 18th birthday to make a move, proudly insisting it was perfectly legal. Administrators often looked the other way, treating it as a private matter instead of a professional violation. The cultural mindset was permissive. Adults were rarely questioned about their behavior, and young people were assumed to be mature enough to decide. But beneath the surface, it reflected a system that misunderstood consent and normalized imbalance. Today, that behavior would end a career instantly, but back then, it was whispered about more than punished. Former students who experienced it were left with confusing feelings, validation mixed with unease, affection intertwined with manipulation. The line between teacher and student was never meant to be crossed, yet for many in that era, it was erased by silence. What people once dismissed as harmless now stands as a stark reminder of how power can hide in plain sight. After the final bell in the 1970s, students did not always go home. Many schools expected them to stay behind to clean the classrooms, sweeping floors, wiping chalkboards, emptying trash bins, and straightening desks. It was not considered community service. It was simply part of being a student. Teachers handed out chores like they handed out homework, and compliance was not optional. Some schools even assigned rotating duty charts, so every child eventually spent their turn as a makeshift janitor. Parents rarely complained. It builds character, they were told. For the schools, it was a way to save money and instill discipline. But for the kids, it was unpaid labor disguised as a lesson in responsibility. Students often finished these tasks long after classes ended, tired and hungry, their hands coated in chalk dust. There were no gloves, no cleaning supplies meant for children, just a rag and a bucket. Yet there was also a strange pride attached to it. The clean boards and polished desks became quiet proof of diligence. Still, looking back, it is unsettling to think how normalized it was to rely on children to maintain the school environment. Today, janitorial work is protected and professional, but back then it was just another rule no one questioned. The line between discipline and exploitation was thin, and for many kids it was scrubbed away along with the floors they were told to clean. Discipline in the 1970s often had a sense of irony, and nowhere was that clearer than in the cigarette detention swaps. Teachers were supposed to confiscate cigarettes from students caught smoking on school grounds, but many took the pack and kept it for themselves. Some even lit one right there, turning the punishment into a joke. Students laughed awkwardly, and the message was confusing. Smoking was wrong for kids, but apparently fine for the adults who enforced the rules. Teachers would sometimes share stories about their favorite brands or use cigarettes as a bonding gesture, as though it proved they were cool. This casual hypocrisy showed how blurred the moral boundaries were. Smoking was everywhere, in teacher lounges, hallways, and even classrooms. The health warnings that seem obvious now were barely discussed then. For students, the act of being caught felt less like discipline and more like initiation into adulthood. Watching your teacher take your cigarette and enjoy it sent a message louder than any lecture. It told you that authority could bend the rules whenever it wanted. Those moments taught cynicism early, long before students had words for it. Looking back, it feels absurd, even darkly comedic, that the people meant to enforce responsibility were often modeling the opposite. It was a different time, yes, but also a clear example of how the culture of the 1970s blurred right and wrong under the haze of cigarette smoke. Walking through hallways in the 1970s was an exercise in enforced silence. Many schools imposed what they called silence lines, strict no-talking zones between classes. Students were expected to move from one room to another without a word, as though conversation itself disrupted the order of the day. Teachers stood at the ends of corridors, watching for whispers, laughter, or any sound that broke the rule. Violators faced detention, extra homework, or even public scolding. The reasoning behind it was control. Quiet meant discipline, and discipline meant respect. But what it really bred was tension. Children learned to fear the sound of their own voices, to associate talking with trouble. It was especially harsh for younger students who naturally wanted to share excitement or confusion between lessons. The echoes of footsteps in those empty halls carried a strange loneliness. Looking back, it is hard not to see the irony. a place built for learning that punished curiosity and connection. The silence lines reflected a belief that order mattered more than humanity, that compliance was the highest virtue a student could have. Those narrow corridors became small, rigid reminders of a bigger idea. Schools were not just teaching facts, they were training obedience. If silence lines were about control, then goose lines were their physical counterpart. In many elementary schools of the 1970s, students were required to walk single file, hands clasped neatly behind their backs, eyes forward, mouths shut. Teachers called it proper posture, but it looked and felt like a military drill. The rule started in kindergarten and often continued through middle school, a daily march of discipline meant to keep children calm and orderly. Talking, laughing, or breaking formation meant starting over, or worse, losing recess. Some teachers took pride in how quiet and synchronized their classes moved through the halls, as if silence were proof of their authority. For students, though, it was a small humiliation, a reminder that individuality had no place during school hours. The posture was uncomfortable, the silence heavier than it should have been. Looking back, it is easy to see how absurd it was to treat children like soldiers for something as simple as walking to lunch. It was never about safety. It was about control disguised as decorum. Many who lived through it still recall the feeling of their hands pressed against their backs, the sting of being told to act like little ladies and gentlemen. But beneath that rule was a deeper lesson: obedience over expression, compliance over comfort. It is strange how such a simple line could reveal the entire philosophy of an era, one that prized order so highly it forgot what childhood was supposed to feel like. This one feels almost like a cartoon, but it was real. If you messed up in class, especially in earlier decades, teachers might march you to the front of the room, plop a tall, cone-shaped dunce cap on your head, and make you sit in the corner, in front of everyone. The cap usually had the word dunce written across it in big, bold letters, and the goal was not correction, it was humiliation. You were basically put on display as the class failure. For some kids, it only made things worse. They would act out more or stop trying entirely. Teachers thought it was a way to motivate, but it usually just created shame and resentment. Eventually, educators realized there were better ways to handle mistakes. The dunce cap was removed. So was the corner. And slowly, the practice faded into legend. Now, the only place you will see a dunce cap is in an old comic strip or a vintage photograph. But for the kids who had to wear it, it is not something they laugh about. It is something they never forgot. Before insulated bags and bendy ice packs, you had a metal lunchbox, and it said everything about you. In the 1970s, a lunchbox was more than a container. It was a bold, clunky rectangle of personality. Scooby-Doo? The $6 Million Man? Maybe Wonder Woman if you were one of the cool ones. And inside that heavy metal case was a matching thermos that clicked shut and could keep soup warm or spill milk everywhere depending on the day. Your mom might have packed you a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in wax paper, a bag of pretzels, and an apple so bruised it looked like it had seen combat. And that was lunch. But that box, oh, it took a beating. It rolled down staircases, got sat on, slammed into lockers, and was sometimes used as a substitute football. By the time you made it to spring, the paint was chipped, the character's face was half scratched off, and the thermos smelled permanently like tomato soup. But you kept it. Every lunch period was a lineup of pop culture on the cafeteria table, and heaven help the kid who showed up with just a brown bag. That was social exile. Those metal lunch boxes were noisy, dented, and always too small, but they carried our childhoods inside them, one squashed sandwich at a time. Back then, there was no digital gradebook, no password-protected portals. Teachers had a clipboard, a piece of chalk, and one of the cruelest traditions you could imagine. Grades were posted, on the wall, the blackboard, or taped outside the classroom. Your name, your score, there for everyone to see. The top kids beamed with pride. The rest of the class felt the slow crawl of shame. Students learned their rank by how low their name appeared on the list. This was not about motivation, it was control. A way to keep students in line with fear of public failure. If you asked about privacy, people would have laughed. Privacy was not the point. Visibility was. Today we call this a breach of confidentiality. We call it unacceptable. But in the 1970s, it was everyday life. Some kids worked harder to climb that list, others gave up entirely. And some just remembered that sinking feeling, the moment their friends saw that red pen's score next to their name. You do not forget something like that. You carry it, even now. Rubik's Cubes sat on coffee tables like miniature monuments to frustration. Their colorful sides promised fun, but more often delivered rage. You twisted, you turned, you thought you had it, and then disaster. One wrong move sent you back to square one. Solving it became a badge of honor. If someone at school could actually complete a Rubik's Cube, they were treated like a genius. Crowds gathered, applause broke out, but most of us faked it. We peeled off the stickers and rearranged them to make it look solved, or we popped out the pieces and snapped them back into place. Technically cheating? Maybe. Spiritually rewarding? Absolutely. There were books, guides, even videos explaining how to beat the cube, but few had the patience. And yet, we all kept trying. Rubik's Cubes lived in junk drawers, backpacks, and classroom desks. They were part toy, part puzzle, part stress test. Looking back, they were frustrating, addictive, and completely iconic. And to this day, if you spot one on a shelf, your hands remember the rhythm of twist, turn, twist, even if your brain still has no idea how to actually solve it. Backyard fun in the 1970s was loud, chaotic, and often a little dangerous. Enter the water wiggle. It looked innocent enough. A smiling plastic head connected to a long hose. But the moment the water was turned on, it became a wild, whipping, serpentine menace. It sprayed water in every direction and flailed unpredictably, turning the yard into a circus of screams and soaked clothes. Kids chased it. It chased them back. You never knew where it would go. One second it was dancing in the air. The next it was smacking you in the shins. It had one job: to create watery mayhem, and it was great at it. Parents watched from porches, laughing or nervously sipping iced tea. Some turned the pressure down, others cranked it up. Either way, you ended up drenched. There were no safety labels or slow modes, just you, the hose, and the wiggling chaos that could knock over toddlers and send dogs running. It was thrilling, it was unpredictable, and it was absolutely beloved. They do not make toys like that anymore, probably for good reason. But those summer afternoons when laughter mixed with shrieks and the sprinkler twisted through the air like a possessed noodle, those are hard to forget. You are not imagining it. Schools really used to let the principal hit kids with a wooden paddle. This was not a figure of speech or a rare punishment. It was standard. If you talked back, got into a fight, or even forgot your homework one too many times, you could be marched down the hallway, asked to bend over, and whop. That was your lesson for the day. Some of these paddles even had holes drilled into them, supposedly to increase speed. Others were carved with slogans like Board of Education, like it was some kind of joke. And it was not just principals doing it. Coaches, vice principals, even homeroom teachers were allowed to paddle students with little to no permission from parents. It was considered discipline. The thing is, a lot of kids just felt humiliated or afraid, not reformed. Over time, lawsuits and mental health studies pushed back. States started banning corporal punishment, and schools were forced to find new ways to deal with behavior. Today, hitting a student with a paddle is not just frowned upon, it is illegal in most places. But if you grew up in those earlier decades, you probably still remember the sound of it. The silence in the hallway, the held breath, the way it made everything just a little too real. You knew it was going to be a good day when the lights went out and the film strip projector came out. That low whir, the faint hum, and the little beep that told the teacher it was time to click to the next slide. Beep, click, and again, beep, click. In the 1970s, these things were everywhere in schools. Educational videos were not on YouTube. They were printed on transparent frames and wound into a reel like some old Hollywood mystery. The narrator always sounded like he was reading out of a phone book, and the animations were, well, let's just say, budget-friendly. but you still loved every second. Because it meant no notes, no tests, just sitting back and hoping the teacher forgot the lights were off. Every class had that one projector that only half worked. The lens was always dusty. The bulb would burn out mid-lesson. Sometimes it was backwards or upside down. But you watched anyway. Whether it was about how plants grow, the water cycle, or some animated duck teaching math, the film strip was a golden break from routine. It turned classrooms into tiny theaters. It turned teachers into projectionists. And it turned students into slack-jawed kids staring at a flickering wall, completely content. In the 1970s, schools tracked students early and without much say from parents. It was called ability grouping. But let us be honest, it often meant separating kids by race, class, and perceived intelligence. Students were labeled as gifted, average, or slow by the time they hit second grade. And those labels stuck. There were separate reading groups, different math worksheets, sometimes even separate lunchtimes. Kids in the lower groups were sent to different classrooms, given less engaging work, and expected to just keep up somehow. Teachers rarely challenged these placements. Parents were rarely informed, and if they were told it was for the child's own good. But for many kids, it was a sentence. A quiet message that said, "You will not catch up." Today, tracking without transparency or consent is highly scrutinized. We know how damaging those early decisions can be. But back then, it was built into the system. Students who needed more support were given less. Students who needed encouragement got silence. And it created gaps that would last a lifetime. Not everyone knew they were being left behind. But some did. And they never forgot. Cabbage Patch Kid frenzy turned toy stores into battlegrounds. These soft-bodied dolls with unique, slightly odd faces were the must-have gift of the 1980s. Each one came with a birth certificate and adoption papers, making it feel like you were bringing home a real baby. But getting your hands on one? That was another story. Parents lined up at dawn. Some camped overnight. Others sprinted through department stores in scenes more suited to action movies than holiday shopping. There were arguments, tears, the occasional tackle, and when someone finally scored a doll, they clutched it like it was made of gold. Kids loved them. They named them, dressed them, and carried them everywhere. Some families had to settle for knockoffs with names like Garden Patch Pals that never quite felt the same. But if you had a real one, you were a legend. Looking back, it seems wild that a doll caused so much chaos. But in that moment, nothing mattered more. Cabbage Patch Kids were not just toys. They were trophies. Proof that your parents had braved the crowds and won. And decades later, those round faces still sit on shelves, quietly remembering the madness they caused. Tang was not just a drink. It was a symbol of the future. Pitched as the beverage astronauts drank in space, this orange powdered miracle made you feel like you were participating in the space race from your own kitchen. Every kid wanted Tang. Every mom kept a jar in the cupboard. All you needed was water and a spoon, and suddenly you were sipping the same stuff that orbited the Earth. It was sweet, artificial, and packed with flavor. And it made you feel cool. The powder never fully dissolved, which meant gritty sips near the end were just part of the experience. If you got the scoop size right, you earned that perfect bright orange glow. Too much, and it was syrupy sludge. Too little, and it was just sad orange water. Tang was more than a drink. It was a cultural event. The jar was wide and squat with a screw-on lid, and every household seemed to have one. Kids felt proud making it on their own. No adult needed. It became the go-to for lunch, after school, and Saturday cartoons. You never questioned the science behind it. You just knew that if it was good enough for NASA, it was good enough for you. That dusty scoop brought the cosmos into your kitchen. Believe it or not, some schools in the past had actual smoking areas, not just for staff, but for students too. You would walk past the gym and see a fenced-off spot with ashtrays, a few benches, and maybe even a trash can overflowing with cigarette butts. And yes, this was on school property. If you were in high school and of smoking age, whatever that meant at the time, you could light up during lunch or between classes. Staff had their own designated corner too, usually near the parking lot or behind the cafeteria. Sometimes teachers and students would smoke within a few yards of each other. It sounds surreal now, but it was all part of the culture. Smoking was seen as a stress reliever, even something social. Schools tried to contain the habit instead of ban it. But by the 1990s, health warnings and anti-smoking campaigns gained ground. Laws changed. Suddenly, it was not just about being old enough. It was about protecting the health of every student on campus. Smoking areas disappeared. The only thing left was the faint smell of tobacco in your coat sleeve, and maybe the memory of lighting up with your best friend before algebra. A habit like that might have felt cool then, but now? It is hard to imagine anything less welcome at a school. This one hits hard. Story time with a record player was a full event in the 1970s classroom. The lights would dim just a little, the teacher would carefully place a giant vinyl record on the turntable, and you would hear that faint crackle as the needle dropped. The voice would come in, calm and theatrical. When you hear the chime, turn the page. That chime? Magic. Goosebumps every time. These stories were not just being told, they were being performed, with background music, sound effects, and perfect pacing. The class would sit in a soft silence, some kids closing their eyes, others watching the teacher turn the pages of the giant picture book up front. You might not have remembered the story itself, but you remembered how it made you feel. Safe. Still. Completely there. The record player would sometimes skip or drag, but that just made it more real. It was tactile, it was shared, and it beat spelling tests any day of the week. Story records were the lullaby of the school day, a rare, slow moment where the classroom felt more like home. Believe it or not, some teachers smoked during class, not just outside, not just during breaks. Right there in the room, ashtray on the desk, cigarette between fingers, lecture going on like nothing was wrong. The smell hung heavy in the air. Students coughed, eyes watered, but no one dared say anything. After all, this was the teacher's space. And back then, cigarettes were not seen as dangerous. They were a lifestyle, a stress reliever, a right. There were classrooms with open windows and fans that barely helped, and you could always tell which rooms had that teacher, the one who lit up after the bell and smoked all the way through silent reading, sometimes even while grading your paper. This was not a back alley habit, it was a school day normal. The cigarette breaks never really stopped. They just followed students back into the room. And the lesson it taught? Your health came second. It seems unthinkable now, but it was perfectly normal then. No one talked about secondhand smoke. No one asked kids how it made them feel. Today, the idea of smoking anywhere near a student is grounds for instant removal. But back then, it was part of the routine. Kids went home with their clothes smelling like tobacco and chalk, and somehow nobody thought twice about it. They were not just for carrying sandwiches and juice boxes. They were badges of honor. In the 1970s, metal lunchboxes with cartoon characters were everything to a kid. You marched into school like you owned the place if you had the Brady Bunch, Scooby-Doo, or Fat Albert slung over your arm. They clanged when you walked, chipped when you dropped them, and smelled like peanut butter forever. But they were yours. The thermos inside matched the design, with a plastic cup that screwed on top and often leaked just enough milk to give the lunchbox that signature sour scent. You would line them up on the windowsill during class or hide secret notes inside the lid. The paint would eventually chip, the latches would rust, but you never wanted to give it up. Today, they have been replaced by soft-sided, logo-free lunch carriers. But for those who grew up in that era, seeing one again brings back the sound of the bell, the taste of a bologna sandwich, and that magical feeling of opening your box and hoping you got a Hostess cupcake instead of raisins. They were loud, proud, and deeply personal. One glance at the dented metal, and the memories rush back like a school bell in September. There was a time when walking into the school cafeteria meant facing a lineup of vending machines that looked like they came straight out of a candy commercial. Rows of chocolate bars, sour straws, bags of chips, and soda cans chilled just right, all waiting to be yours with a few quarters. It was every kid's dream. You could buy a full can of soda at 8 in the morning, pair it with a pack of gummy worms, and call it breakfast. And no one stopped you. These machines were placed in hallways, gyms, even right outside classrooms. Teachers used them. So did students. Some kids brought in rolls of quarters just for snack time. Others skipped lunch entirely and loaded up on sugar. It was not uncommon to see a kid crash by third period, groggy and glassy-eyed. The worst part? No one was tracking how much anyone ate. But over time, schools started noticing a rise in sugar crashes, hyperactivity, and mid-morning naps. Health experts stepped in. New guidelines were passed. Schools began replacing soda with juice, candy with granola bars. Eventually, many banned the machines entirely, or kept them off limits during school hours. Today's students still get snacks, but they are carefully approved and often kind of sad. If you ever bought a chocolate bar and soda as your lunch and called it a win, you lived in a golden and now banned era of school snacking. The hallway before class was always buzzing. But tucked in every corridor or back corner of your classroom was a row of coat hooks and cubbies, tiny storage spaces that somehow held your whole world. Your puffy jacket, your metal lunchbox, your gym shoes in a brown paper bag, all jammed in together like puzzle pieces. In the 1970s, lockers were not for everyone. A simple hook and a wooden cubby did the trick. You recognized your space without needing a name tag. Maybe it was the one under the fire escape poster. Maybe it still had a sticker from the kid who used it last year. It smelled like wet wool, pencil shavings, and peanut butter. And when you bent down to grab your stuff, you felt safe, hidden, like you had a tiny piece of real estate in the school. You started and ended every day there, drop off, pick up, a small routine that bookended everything. If someone else took your spot, you noticed. Because that hook and cubby were yours, even if they belonged to everyone. Sometimes it felt like a blessing. The lights would dim, the reel would start, and for 90 minutes, you were off the hook. But more often than not, these movies had nothing to do with the subject. Teachers showed old comedies, action flicks, cartoons, whatever they had in the cabinet. No lesson plans, no follow-up questions, just filler. Something to keep the class quiet while the teacher caught up on grading or took a mental break. You watched Herbie Rides again in math class, or an old black and white Western in science. At the time, it felt like a break from the pressure, but it was also a break from learning. These movies were not used to spark discussion or enhance curriculum. They were stand-ins for teaching, substitutes for effort, and for kids who needed structure or support, it meant losing another day of progress. Today, schools have strict guidelines around media in classrooms. Teachers need to tie it to learning objectives. But in the 1970s, no one questioned it. A movie day was just part of the cycle. And the irony? Some students ended up remembering those movies more vividly than the lessons that got skipped. Because what stuck was not the plot, but the message that your time, your education, and your focus could be set aside whenever it was convenient for someone else. Yourself a bowl of cereal, always from a brightly colored box featuring a sugar-charged cartoon mascot. But it was not just about what you poured. It was what you poured it into. Saturday morning cereal bowls were branded, oversized, and beloved. They had the logos, the characters, sometimes even games printed inside. Trix, Fruity Pebbles, Super Sugar Crisp, each had its own bowl. You held it like a trophy. You filled it past the brim. The milk turned a strange color. The spoon clinked loudly. And the real show? It was waiting for you in the living room. Schoolhouse Rock, the Super Friends, the Bugs Bunny and Roadrunner Hour. You balanced the bowl on your knees, dripping milk on the carpet, eyes glued to the screen. Parents still asleep, the sun barely up. This was your time. The cereal was sweet, the cartoons were loud, and the bowl made it official. Some were premiums you mailed away for. Others came as prizes. But they all had one thing in common. They turned breakfast into a weekly holiday. That bowl was not just dishware. It was a ticket to your favorite time of the week. Before backpacks were stitched with mesh, logos, and headphone ports, you had a cloth book bag. Plain, simple, sometimes handmade, and always dependable. These soft-sided carryalls were what got you through the week in the 1970s. Some were canvas with thick drawstrings. Others were patchwork, sewn by your mom or your grandma, with colorful fabric and uneven stitching that made them one of a kind. They did not have compartments. They did not have padding. What they had was character. You stuffed your books, folders, maybe a crumpled note from the principal's office, and hauled it all home with one arm dangling or slung over your shoulder like a real pro. Sometimes the strap broke. Sometimes you fixed it with a safety pin or a little sewing kit from home. These bags weren't bought to make a statement. They were there to do a job, and they did it well. A lot of times you could tell which book bag belonged to which kid without even seeing their face. The one with patches all over it? That was Amy's. The one stained with grape juice and highlighter? Definitely Bobby's. They were silent companions, sitting under your desk, getting kicked during math, or tossed onto the coat hook when the bell rang. You never thought twice about them. But they were there, every day. Carried your homework, your doodles, your growing little world. Looking back, it's wild how much of your life could fit inside something so small and so soft. Recess in the past was not just unregulated. It was a full-blown injury waiting to happen. Picture this, a towering metal jungle gym, hot in the sun, slick in the rain, and what was underneath? Solid, unforgiving asphalt. No rubber mats, no wood chips, just pavement. You fell, you got scraped, or worse. These jungle gyms were built like they wanted to test your limits. Climb too high, miss a step, and you were doing a face-first dive into the blacktop. Teachers rarely noticed unless you were really crying. Some kids wore their scrapes like badges of honor. Others learned to jump down early just to avoid a worse fall. You could spot the daredevils by the bruises on their elbows, and once the bell rang, everyone scrambled off like nothing happened. Injuries were expected, even encouraged in some circles. But hey, you learned fast. Eventually, safety reports, lawsuits, and rising injuries pushed schools to rethink playground design. Jungle gyms were lowered, metal was replaced with plastic, and soft landing zones became mandatory. Asphalt was officially banned under play equipment. Today's playgrounds are safer, maybe even too safe, some would say. But if you still have scars on your knees from falling off the monkey bars, you know exactly what kind of chaos we used to call fun. There was nothing more nerve-wracking in the 1970s than report card day, except maybe hearing your teacher read yours out loud. Yes, out loud. Teachers would go name by name, calling students to the front, or worse, just announcing the comments straight from their grade books in front of everyone. If you had a glowing review, you might walk away with a proud smile. But if your comments said things like disruptive, lazy, or needs improvement, that walk back to your seat felt like a slow-motion march through shame. Everyone heard it. Everyone laughed or stared. Even the kind teachers thought it was just part of the routine. But what they did not realize, or did not care about, was that those few words stuck. One sentence from a tired adult could define a kid for the whole year, and for some, even longer. Teachers called it feedback, but what it really was exposure. Not just your grades, but your behavior, your habits, your struggles, your business. Today, this would violate privacy laws and ethical standards. Schools now protect student records carefully, but back then, your reputation could rise or fall based on a teacher's tone of voice in front of your peers. There was no consent, no warning, just a wave of humiliation that sometimes felt worse than the grade itself. And for many kids, those words were the ones they carried into every class after that, no matter how hard they worked to change. You never forget the day you walked into class and saw a glass tank with a live snake in it. Or worse, a tarantula. And this was not a science lab. This was your regular classroom. These class pets were meant to teach responsibility, biology, maybe even courage. But let's be real. They mostly taught kids how to freak each other out. The snake would shed in the corner, the tarantula would vanish into its little cave, and every now and then, one of them would get out. Chaos. Full panic mode. And who was responsible? Usually the teacher, sometimes the students. Eventually, school boards realized that venomous or aggressive animals had no place in an elementary school. Bans were passed, rules were written. Now, if a class has a pet at all, it is usually a hamster, a turtle, or maybe a fish. Harmless, manageable. But if you went to school in the era of scaly or hairy surprises, you know just how much tension a single hiss or rustle could cause. If these forgotten school rules made you look back in disbelief, share the one you still can't believe was real in the comments, give that like button the respect your old principal demanded, and subscribe so you never miss another trip through history's strangest lessons.